We cannot fully celebrate Emmanuel's history without reflecting on the faithful stewardship of its founders, the legacy which has been passed down to us through the generations. Establishing a congregation is an act of stewardship because it requires a deep commitment of time, talent, and financial resources in response to God's call to plant a church. For Lutheran immigrants to the United States, starting a congregation was especially daunting. Many, like Emmanuel's predominantly Swedish founders, came from countries where the Lutheran Church was the state church, funded by tax dollars. The United States was very different. There was no state church and no automatic source of funding. If you wanted to build a church, it had to be built and sustained by its members. This required a completely different mindset for these immigrants, but they adapted. Their faith and love of God, their need to worship, inspired people with names like Gorman, Bergstrom, Pedersen, Sorensen, and Koski to find places to gather, to call pastors, to obtain land, erect buildings, acquire parsonages, add parish halls, and furnish these spaces with the best that they could afford in order that God would be glorified. At the same time, Lutherans were fiercely committed to social ministry and gave generously to build hospitals like the Lutheran Medical Center, orphanages and old age homes like the Wartburg, schools and colleges and other institutions to care for those in need. They did all of this because their love of God compelled them to proclaim the gospel and to care for their neighbor, following Jesus' example. As congregations developed, they knew both prosperity and hardship. Would there be enough money to pay the pastor, keep the lights on, repair the roof, replace the broken boiler, even to pay for the basic ordinary things like paper for the bulletin or communion wine? Appeals to members for funds just to keep things afloat were common, especially during the Great Depression. But a congregation needs to do more than maintain itself. It needs to grasp a ministry vision that meets needs both inside and outside its walls. In launching ministries and campaigns to better serve their communities, many congregations have wondered if sufficient funds would be committed to make them viable, to enable those served to experience the grace and love of God. Faithful stewardship cannot be separated from budgets and fundraising, because committing to a ministry, a building repair, or a renovation requires not only the commitment of our hearts and minds, but also of our wallets. But faithful stewardship goes even deeper than that. It is rooted in the heartfelt acknowledgement that the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. When we consider this verse from Psalm 24 alongside God so loved the world, we realize that not only is all of creation God's gift, but it is also deeply loved by God. A selfless love shown us in the gift of Jesus. Faithful stewardship, first and foremost, imitates God's example of giving. It is a loving response, our thanksgiving for God's love and grace freely shown to us in Christ. It is not an obligation, but rather an offering of love. It encompasses more than what we do with 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, and even 20% of our time, our talent, and our possessions. It encompasses our whole lives, spiritually and materially. This totality of living and giving is what our Emmanuel and other ancestors in the faith understood and modeled for us as they undertook the challenge of establishing and growing congregations. This remains the task before us, to live in love and generosity to the God who dearly loves us and lavishes us with grace and blessing amid all the joys and sorrows of this life. With God's help, let us find the confidence to do this for the rest of 2018, 2019, and beyond, so that we too will continue to pass on a legacy of faithful stewardship to those who will worship in this place 25, or, God willing, 125 years from now. Thank you.